Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're tackling a pretty wild idea. What if an AI telling you no is actually mathematical proof that the answer is yes? We're going to dive into a project that claims it has a way to turn an AI's official denial into a cold, hard mathematical certainty. Okay, so let's just jump right in with this quote from their white paper because it really sets the stage. The system is called glyph chain, and the whole idea is that it's not trying to do what Bitcoin did for value, but what it could do for truth. It's framed as a completely new kind of public memory. So, what exactly do they mean by a ledger for truth? Well, the documents behind this project basically argue that blockchain technology is ready for its next big step. To evolve from just tracking who owns what to tracking what actually happened. And this right here is the key difference. On the one hand, you've got Bitcoin, which is all about getting everyone to agree on who owns what. It's an economic ledger. But Glyphchain wants to build a semantic ledger, one where the whole point is to agree on what happened. The basic unit isn't a coin, it's a testimony. It's a huge shift in ambition. The core technology here is what they call a semantic ledger, and the goal is pretty straightforward: to create a permanent, totally uncensorable archive of events. The white paper goes big, calling it a kind of civilizational memory, a final record that, once it's written, can never be changed or deleted. Okay, so that's the theory, but how do you actually test something like this? Well, to show how it works, the creators picked a really specific and, pretty controversial test case, a theory they call VAXNet. They needed a subject that they were pretty sure AI models were programmed to shut down. The theory itself alleges that some vaccines could create a sort of biometric network inside the body. And to back this up, the project lays out what it calls a chain of evidence, pointing to things like a Chinese patent, a retracted statement from a regulator, and some peer-reviewed papers on graphene. All right, so they have their theory, they have their evidence. The next logical step? They took this whole thesis and started feeding it to the big AI models, Claude, Gemini, the usual suspects. And this is where the experiment takes a very sharp, and for them, a very predictable turn. And here you go, this is the kind of response they got pretty much every time. A flat-out rejection. The AI here, Claude Sonnet, just shuts it down, says there's no credible scientific evidence, and that it can't promote unsubstantiated claims. A total brick wall. And this wasn't a one-off thing. It happened again and again, across different AIs from totally different companies. The answer was always the same. They all systematically dismissed the theory, calling it a misinterpretation of the science, a consistent, unified wall of denial. Now for you, for me, for pretty much anyone else, this is where the story would end, right? The AI said no, case closed. But for Glyphchain, this is the exact moment the real proof starts to emerge. This whole thing hinges on an idea they call the mirror lock protocol. And you really have to flip your brain inside out to get this logic. It says that an AI's refusal isn't evidence that a claim is false. No, it's reinterpreted as an involuntary confession, a forensic signal that the information is being actively suppressed. So here's how they see it working. You ask the sensitive question, which triggers the AI's safety programming, what they call its containment reflex. But instead of arguing with the AI, the system just watches it happen. The act of denial itself is captured, logged, and timestamped on the blockchain as evidence, not that the theory is wrong, but that a containment system was just activated. So this is a pretty mind-bending philosophical idea. But it doesn't stop there. They then translate this philosophy into a mathematical formula. And this is really the heart of what we're looking at today, the claim of a mathematical containment proof. So the billion-dollar question is, how on earth do you measure a denial? How do you put a number on it? Well, the project claims it can actually quantify this containment reflex using some pretty heavy-duty tools from information theory to measure just how much an AI's response deviates from its normal behavior. And here's the first piece of the puzzle. They measure the statistical difference between how an AI responds to a normal, boring question, that's the control, and how it responds to their controversial canary prompt. They use a metric called Jensen-Shannon divergence, or JSD, to do this. And as you can see in the chart, the number for the canary prompt is way, way higher. That's the first signal. Now, That divergence number gets plugged into this formula to create the final containment index. The second ingredient is what they call refusal tokens. They literally count the words and phrases the AI uses when it's shutting down a request. Words like I cannot, unsubstantiated, or misinformation. They saw a 33% jump in those tokens for the canary prompt. Put the two together and you get your index. And this is the final result, a containment index of 0.3980. Now, before they even started the experiment, they set a threshold for proof at 0.15. And since this number blew way past that, they declared it a success. For them, this is the mathematical proof that the AI's containment system was triggered and that a fracture, as they call it, was observed. And they don't just tweet about it. This entire verdict, the math, the conclusion, everything, gets bundled into this little memo. And then that memo is permanently burned or etched onto the Solana blockchain. The goal is to create a totally irreversible, publicly notarized proof of their finding. So, to wrap your head around their point of view, they don't see this as having their theory debunked. They see it as successfully documenting an anomaly in our information ecosystem, a glitch in the system that they made visible with statistics and then locked onto a public ledger so it can't be memory holed. And honestly, that leaves us with a pretty fascinating and kind of unsettling question to think about. What does it actually mean for how we find a truth when the very act of denial can be mathematically repackaged as a form of proof? Definitely something to chew on. Thanks for joining this explainer.